The first thing you need to understand about Elena Whitmore is that she looked like she was already dying. 26 years old, and she moved through Black Hollow like a ghost nobody wanted to acknowledge. Thin in a way that made people uncomfortable. The kind of thin where you could see the shape of her collarbone pressing against her dress, where her wrists looked fragile enough to snap if she lifted something too heavy. Her face was all sharp angles now, cheekbones that hadn't been that prominent when Thomas was alive, eyes that had sunk deeper into their sockets, a jawline that cut too severe against skin that had gone pale from too many meals skipped. Her hair, which had once been thick and dark and glossy, now hung limp around her shoulders. She tied it back with whatever scrap of fabric she could find because she'd sold her good ribbons months ago. Sold them for 60 cents to buy flour that lasted less than 2 weeks. The people of Black Hollow had stopped meeting her eyes sometime around October. It wasn't cruelty exactly, more like preemptive grief. They'd already decided how this story ended, and watching it happen in slow motion made them uncomfortable. Better to look away. Better to pretend they didn't notice her getting thinner, quieter, more translucent with each passing week. Thomas Whitmore had died in a tunnel explosion up in the northern rail camp 7 months ago. They'd sent his body back in a pine box that Elena couldn't afford but couldn't refuse. The railroad company sent a letter expressing their deepest condolences and a check for $47. Apparently that's what her husband's life was worth after you subtracted the cost of the coffin and the transportation fees. $47. She'd spent 31 of it on the burial. The rest went to feed her daughters for 3 weeks. Margaret was 7, Sarah was 5, and they were hungry in that specific way children get when hunger becomes normal, not complaining anymore, just quiet and tired and too small for their ages. The ranch was dying too, not dramatically, not all at once. Just the slow, inevitable collapse of something that can't sustain itself anymore. Fences sagging under snow they'd never get repaired. The barn with a hole in the roof that grew a little bigger every time the wind picked up. 3 horses sold off one by one until only Rosie was left, and Rosie was old enough that Elena wasn't sure how many more winters she had in her. The cattle were gone except for 2 cows that produced barely enough milk to keep the girls from getting sick. The chickens had been reduced to 4 nervous hens that didn't lay consistently anymore because they could sense the desperation in the air. Everything was falling apart in increments too small to fight and too constant to ignore. And then the foreclosure notice arrived. Elena found it nailed to her front door on a Tuesday morning while frost was still thick on the ground. Heavy paper. Official seal. The kind of document that doesn't care about your circumstances. Notice of foreclosure and pending seizure. She read it 3 times standing there on the porch with her shawl pulled tight against the cold, her breath making small clouds in the air, her fingers going numb where they gripped the edges of the paper. 5 days. They were giving her 5 days to vacate the property, or the sheriff would remove them by force. The mortgage holder, some investment company she'd never heard of, claimed she'd missed 4 payments, which was true. She had. Because Thomas was dead and the railroad's $47 hadn't stretched far enough to cover both food and land payments, and Elena had made the choice any mother would make. She fed her daughters. Now they were taking the house. Elena stood there on the porch for a long time after she finished reading. Long enough that Margaret came outside wrapped in a too thin blanket and asked if she was okay. "I'm fine, sweetheart." "You're crying." "It's just the cold. Go back inside where it's warm." Warm was a generous word for it. They were burning furniture now, chair legs and broken crates and anything made of wood that wasn't structural. The woodpile had run out in November. Elena had tried chopping more herself, but she didn't have Thomas's strength, and after 4 hours of swinging the axe, she'd managed to split maybe a quarter of what he could have done in one. That night she sat at the kitchen table after the girls had gone to sleep and tried to make the numbers work. She had $11 left. The foreclosure couldn't be stopped without paying $240 in back payments. There was no universe in which those numbers reconciled. She could try talking to the bank in town, but she already knew how that conversation would go. She'd been there twice before. The bank manager, a soft-handed man named Morris who'd never missed a meal in his life, had looked at her with something between pity and contempt and explained that banks couldn't operate on charity. "You understand our position, Mrs. Whitmore." She understood their position fine. They didn't give a damn if she and her daughters ended up freezing to death in a snowbank somewhere. Dead widows didn't hurt quarterly profits. Elena blew out the lamp and sat in the darkness and tried not to think about what happened to women with no money and no family and 2 children to feed. The options weren't good. She could try finding work, but there wasn't any. Not in Black Hollow, not in winter. The mines weren't hiring and the railroad camps didn't take women, and the only other jobs involved selling something Elena wasn't willing to sell. She could beg. She could take the girls to the church and ask Reverend Michaels if the congregation could help. Except she already knew they couldn't. Half the families in Black Hollow were barely surviving themselves. Charity only stretched so far when everyone was drowning. She could leave, pack up whatever fit in a single bag, take the girls, and just start walking. Hope they made it to the next town before they froze. Hope someone there had work. Hope things would somehow be different somewhere else. But Elena had learned something about hope over the past 7 months. It was expensive, and she was all out. Tin. The blizzard started 2 days before the foreclosure deadline. Not the gentle kind of snow that drifts down prettily and makes everything look clean. This was the kind of storm that wanted you dead. Wind that screamed across the valley hard enough to shake the whole house. Snow that came down so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. Temperature that dropped so fast the windows frosted over on the inside. Elena spent that first day trying to keep the house warm and the girls calm. She burned the last 3 chair legs, boiled the last of the oats into something thin enough to split between 3 bowls, told Margaret and Sarah that everything was going to be fine, even though she'd stopped believing in fine months ago. By nightfall, the storm had gotten worse. The wind sounded like something alive trying to tear the roof off. Snow was piling up against the door so high, Elena wasn't sure they'd be able to open it in the morning. The temperature inside the house kept dropping no matter how much she fed the fire. She put both girls in her bed with every blanket they owned piled on top of them. "Tell us a story, Mama." Sarah's voice was small and muffled under the blankets. Elena's mind was empty. She was too tired, too scared, too aware that in 3 days men with guns would show up to throw them out into the storm, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "I don't know any stories tonight, baby." "Make one up." So Elena closed her eyes and invented something about a princess who lived in a castle made of ice and couldn't feel the cold. She made it up as she went, barely paying attention to the words, just letting her voice fill the silence so her daughters could fall asleep without being afraid. She was just getting to the part where the ice princess found a magical horse when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Thump, heavy, deliberate. From the front porch, Elena went still, listening. For a moment there was nothing but wind. She'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined it when it came again. Thump, thump. Someone was out there. Her first instinct was fear. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody showed up at isolated ranches in the middle of blizzards unless they were lost or desperate or looking for something specific. And Elena had nothing worth stealing except 2 daughters she'd die protecting. She slipped out of bed carefully so she wouldn't wake the girls. Crossed to the bureau where Thomas's rifle was propped in the corner. She'd never fired it. Thomas had tried teaching her once, but she'd hated the noise and the kick and the way it made her shoulders ache for days after. Still, she picked it up. The weight was wrong in her hands, too heavy, too unfamiliar. She moved through this dark house toward the front door, heart hammering, fingers cold against the rifle stock. Wind was howling so loud she almost missed the sound that came next. Not a thump this time. A groan, human, hurt. Elena stood there with her hand on the door latch, frozen between instinct and sense. Every reasonable thought said, don't open that door. You don't know who's out there. You don't know what they want. You're alone with 2 children and no way to defend yourself if this goes wrong. But that sound, that groan, whoever was out there was hurt, maybe dying. Elena thought about Thomas bleeding out in that collapsed tunnel with no one there to help him. She opened the door. The wind nearly ripped it out of her hands. Snow blasted into the house, stinging her face, blinding her. She squinted against it, trying to see anything through the white chaos. And then she saw him. A man collapsed on her porch. Tall, even lying down. Dark coat crusted with ice and snow. One arm twisted underneath him at an angle that looked wrong. Face partially hidden by a scarf, but she could see blood. Dark against the white snow, spreading from somewhere beneath his coat. He wasn't moving. For one terrible second, Elena thought he was already dead. Then his chest hitched. Breath. Shallow and ragged. But there. Hey! Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. Hey, can you hear me? No response. She should have closed the door right then. Should have stepped back inside and pretended she'd never seen him. She had 2 daughters sleeping in the next room and no way to know if this man was dangerous. No way to know what kind of trouble he'd brought to her doorstep. But she'd already opened the door, and Thomas had died alone. Damn it. Elena set the rifle down and grabbed the man under his arms. He was heavy, heavier than she'd expected, and dead weight besides. She managed to drag him maybe 6 inches before her grip slipped and she nearly dropped him. The cold was getting inside the house. She could feel it pouring through the open door, eating up what little warmth the fire had managed to create. She tried again, braced her feet, got her arms under his shoulders, pulled. This time she managed to get him over the threshold. It took 3 more attempts to drag him far enough inside that she could close the door. By the time she finally got it shut, her arms were shaking and her lungs burned from the effort and the cold. The man was lying in a spreading puddle of snowmelt and blood in the middle of her floor. Elena stood there breathing hard, staring down at him, wondering what the hell she'd just done. Up close she could see more details. Dark hair plastered to his skull with melted snow. Strong jaw covered in several days of stubble. A face that might have been handsome under different circumstances, but right now just looked gray and half dead. His coat was good quality, or had been before it got torn and blood-stained. And the blood. There was so much of it. Elena knelt beside him and started working his coat open with numb fingers. The fabric was frozen stiff in places. Underneath, his shirt was soaked through, stuck to his skin with blood that was still warm enough to steam slightly in the cold air. She found the wound on his left side, just below his ribs. Knife, probably. Deep enough that she could see the edges of it opening every time he breathed. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay. You've done this before. She hadn't. Not really. She'd bandaged scraped knees and wrapped a sprained ankle once, but she'd never dealt with anything like this. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't know if it was even possible to save someone who'd lost this much blood. But she didn't know how to give up either. Elena moved fast, grabbed the kettle of water that was still lukewarm from earlier, found the cleanest cloth she had, one of her own undershirts that she tore into strips, retrieved the bottle of whiskey Thomas had kept for special occasions that she'd never had the heart to throw away. She cleaned the wound as best she could, trying to ignore the way the man's breathing got shallower every time she touched the damaged area. Poured whiskey directly into the cut and felt him jerk under her hands, even though he didn't wake up. The bleeding wouldn't stop. She pressed cloth against it, applied pressure the way she thought you were supposed to, watched the fabric turn red and then sodden and then useless. Don't you die on my floor, she told him. I just cleaned it last week. The absurdity of that statement, like anything about her floor mattered right now, almost made her laugh. She didn't laugh. She just kept working, wrapped bandages as tight as she could manage, used strips of torn sheet to bind them in place, covered him with the only spare blanket she had, even though it meant the girls would be colder later. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely tie off the last knot. The man was still unconscious, still breathing. Barely. Elena sat back on her heels and looked at what she'd done. A bleeding stranger in her house. A man she didn't know, hadn't invited, couldn't afford to feed or care for. Someone who might be dangerous. Someone who was definitely trouble. And outside, the blizzard kept screaming. Kid. He didn't wake up that night. Elena checked on him every hour, expecting each time to find him dead. But he kept breathing, shallow and rough, but persistent, and his skin stayed warm enough that she knew he hadn't slipped away yet. The girls woke at dawn to find a stranger on their floor. Who's that? Sarah's voice was cautious, curious but not afraid. Not yet. Someone who needed help. Elena was stirring the remains of yesterday's oat mush back to life over the fire, adding water to stretch it into something approximating breakfast. Don't get too close. Is he dead? No. He looks dead. He's sleeping. Margaret came closer, studying the man with the serious expression she'd developed lately. Too old for 7, too aware of how fragile everything was. Why is there blood? He was hurt. How? I don't know. Are bad men coming? The question landed like a stone in Elena's chest. Because yes, that was the question, wasn't it? This man had showed up bleeding in a blizzard. Someone had hurt him. Someone might be looking for him. And Elena had just painted a target on her own house by dragging him inside. I don't know, she said again. It was the only honest answer she had. They ate breakfast in silence, 3 small bowls of something that barely qualified as food. Elena gave most of hers to the girls. They needed it more. She was already too thin to afford skipping meals, but she was also old enough to go hungry without complaint. The man started to stir around mid-morning, not waking up exactly, just making sounds, small groans, fragments of words that didn't connect into sentences. His head turned restlessly against the floor and his fingers twitched like he was trying to grab something that wasn't there. Elena knelt beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Easy, you're safe. His eyes opened, dark eyes. Confused at first, then sharpening into focus, then immediately scanning the room like he was looking for threats. Where? His voice came out as a rasp. He tried to sit up, and the pain hit him hard enough that he gasped and fell back. Don't move. You're hurt. Where am I? My house. About 6 miles outside Black Hollow. You collapsed on my porch last night. He stared at her like he was trying to make sense of the information. His gaze tracked over her face, her hair, her clothes, cataloging details. How long? About 12 hours. There were... He stopped, swallowed. Men, following me. In this storm, they'd have to be stupid or desperate. Both. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Who's following you? But the man's eyes had already closed again. His breathing evened out into something that might have been sleep or might have been unconsciousness. Elena couldn't tell which. She sat there watching him for a long time. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the white expanse of snow that had buried the valley. The storm was still going. Nothing moved out there except wind. But that didn't mean no one was coming. His name was Rowan Cade. Elena learned that on the second day, when his fever broke long enough for him to stay conscious for more than 5 minutes at a time. Federal surveyor, he managed to say when she asked what he'd been doing out in the mountains. Working on the railway expansion maps. That's dangerous work. Apparently, he tried to smile. It came out more like a grimace. Elena brought him water and a piece of bread soaked in broth. It was all she could spare, and even that felt reckless with the foreclosure deadline creeping closer. But he was hurt, and he'd already lost enough blood that she wasn't sure he could survive without food. Who stabbed you? Mercer's men. The name meant nothing to Elena. Who's Mercer? Rowan's expression changed. Something hard moved behind his eyes. Victor Mercer, land developer. He's been buying up property all through the valley for the past 2 years, getting ready for the railroad expansion. So? So he's not buying it legally. Elena went still. What do you mean? He's been forging railway surveys, manipulating property boundaries, bribing officials to alter federal land records. Then he moves in and forces people to sell at a fraction of what the land is actually worth, or just takes it outright when they can't pay fraudulent tax assessments. The cold feeling in Elena's stomach got worse. How many properties? At least 30 that I know of, probably more. And you have proof? I did. Rowan's hand moved to his coat, or where his coat should have been before Elena had cut it off him. The original survey documents, federal records showing the real boundaries versus what Mercer filed with the county. Where are they? My horse. I hid them in the saddlebags before his men caught up to me. Elena thought about the foreclosure notice nailed to her door. The impossible debt. The investment company she'd never heard of demanding payment for land that had been in Thomas's family for 15 years. Where's your horse? I don't know. I lost him in the storm somewhere between here and the ridge. Elena stood up and walked to the window again. The storm had finally started to break. The snow was still falling, but lighter now, and she could see maybe 30 feet instead of 10. The sky was the kind of flat gray that meant it might clear by evening. I'll find him. You can't go out in this. I've been out in worse. That was a lie. She'd never been out in anything close to this. But she was going anyway because somewhere out there was a horse carrying documents that might explain why she was about to lose everything. And if Mercer was stealing land the way Rowan described, then maybe the debt wasn't real. Maybe the foreclosure was just another piece of his fraud. Maybe Elena wasn't as powerless as everyone thought. She bundled up in every piece of warm clothing she owned, which wasn't much, told Margaret to keep the fire going and not to open the door for anyone except her, kissed both girls, and tried not to think about what happened if she didn't make it back. Then she went out into the snow to find a horse that might not even be alive anymore. It took her 3 hours. 3 hours of trudging through snow that came up past her knees in places, wind that cut through her coat like it wasn't even there, cold that made her fingers go numb and then start aching and then go numb again. She found him in a ravine about 2 miles northeast of the house. Rowan's horse, a big bay gelding, standing with his head down and his reins tangled in a fallen tree branch. He was shaking, but alive. When Elena approached, he startled, eyes rolling white, but he was too tired to run. "Easy," she murmured. "Easy, boy. Let's get you home." The saddlebags were still there. Elena checked them with frozen fingers and found what she was looking for: a leather document case wrapped in oilcloth, surprisingly dry despite everything. She didn't open it, not there. She just untangled the horse, grabbed his reins, and started the long walk back. By the time she made it home, she was shaking so hard she could barely get the door open. Margaret helped her inside while Sarah took the horse to the barn. The 7-year-old knew more about caring for animals than most adults. Elena's hands were too cold to open the document case. She had to sit by the fire for 20 minutes before her fingers worked well enough to undo the clasps. Inside were maps, survey documents, official federal records with stamps and signatures and legal language she didn't fully understand. But she understood enough. She understood property boundaries. She understood that the map showing her ranch, Thomas's ranch, the land they'd worked for years, didn't match the boundaries listed on her foreclosure notice. According to the federal survey, her property line extended another 40 acres east. According to the foreclosure document, it didn't. Someone had changed the boundaries. Someone had made her land smaller on paper so they could claim she'd defaulted on a loan that didn't match what she actually owed. Elena spread the documents on the floor and compared them side by side. Rowan watched from where he was still lying wrapped in blankets, his face pale, but his eyes sharp. "What do you see?" "Someone's been lying about how much land I own. It's not just you. Every property Mercer's targeted shows the same pattern: altered boundaries, fraudulent assessments, forged documents making people think they owe more than they do." Elena stared at the maps, at the proof that everything she'd believed about her situation was based on manufactured debt. How many families has he done this to? Dozens? Maybe more. Anyone who owns land along the planned railway route. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because he owns the sheriff. He owns half the county officials, and the families he's targeting are too isolated and too poor to fight back. By the time they realize what's happening, they've already lost everything. But you have proof. I did. Now you do. Elena looked at him, this bleeding stranger she'd dragged inside without thinking, without knowing what kind of trouble he carried. What were you going to do with it? Get it to the federal courthouse in Silver Ridge, file a formal complaint, force an investigation. But Mercer found out what I'd discovered before I could make it out of the valley. So he tried to kill you. He didn't try. He hired men who were supposed to finish the job. I got lucky. Lucky, Elena thought, was a strange word for half-frozen and bleeding out on a stranger's floor. But she didn't say that. She looked at the documents again. How long would it take to get to Silver Ridge? In good weather, 2 days on horseback. And in this weather? You can't be serious. Elena didn't answer. She was already making calculations in her head. The foreclosure deadline was in 3 days. The storm was breaking. If she left at dawn, she might be able to make it to Silver Ridge before the sheriff showed up to evict them. Might. If she didn't freeze to death in the mountains, if Mercer's men didn't find her first, if the federal court actually cared about frontier widows and forged documents. A lot of ifs. But doing nothing guaranteed she lost everything. I can't go, Rowan said quietly. I can barely stand. I'd never make it through the mountain passes. I know. And you can't go alone. It's too dangerous. Elena looked at Margaret and Sarah huddled together by the fire, trying to pretend they weren't listening to every word. I'm already going, she said. The only question is whether I'm taking these documents with me or leaving them here to burn when Mercer's men show up looking for you. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "If you do this, he'll come after you, the same way he came after me." "He's already coming after me. He's been coming after me for months. I just didn't know his name until now." "Elena, I opened my door, didn't I? Brought you inside, fed you, saved your life." She met his eyes. "Might as well finish what I started." Outside, the storm finally broke completely. Pale sunlight spilled across the snow-covered valley, making everything look clean and new and deceptively peaceful. Elena stood up and began repacking the documents. Tomorrow at dawn, she'd ride for Silver Ridge. Tonight, she had to figure out how to explain to her daughters why Mama was leaving again, and hope she'd be alive to come back. Margaret didn't cry when Elena told her. That was somehow worse than if she had. The 7-year-old just sat there on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, face carefully blank in that way children learn when they're trying to be brave for adults who are falling apart. "How long will you be gone?" Elena was packing, if you could call it that, shoving things into a canvas bag with shaking hands, extra socks, the last piece of dried meat, a knife she wasn't sure she'd know how to use if it came to that. 4 days, maybe 5. "What if you don't come back?" The question sat between them like something physical. Elena stopped packing, turned to face her daughter. Margaret was staring at the floor, jaw tight, shoulders rigid, already preparing herself for the worst because the worst kept happening. "I'm coming back." "Papa said that too." The words hit harder than Elena expected. She crossed the small room and knelt in front of Margaret, taking her daughter's hands in hers. They were so small. When had they gotten so small? "Look at me." Margaret's eyes came up, red-rimmed but dry. "I'm coming back," Elena said again. "I promise." "You can't promise that." "Watch me." It wasn't a good enough answer. Nothing would have been good enough, but it was all Elena had. Sarah appeared in the doorway, dragging the quilt behind her like she'd been doing since she was 3. Her face was puffy from crying. She'd spent the last hour sobbing into Elena's shoulder, asking why Mama had to leave. Why couldn't someone else go? Why did everything bad keep happening? "I want to come with you." "You can't, baby." "Why not?" "Because it's dangerous." "Then you shouldn't go either." The logic was airtight. Elena didn't have a counter-argument that a 5-year-old would accept. Because the truth that she was going anyway, that she had to, that there was no other choice, didn't make sense to someone who just wanted her mother to stay home and be safe. "Mrs. Cassidy is going to come stay with you while I'm gone." Both girls' faces changed. Mrs. Cassidy lived 3 miles down the valley and had 8 children of her own. She was loud and warm and completely overwhelmed, but she was also the only person Elena trusted to keep her daughters fed and safe for a few days. "I don't want Mrs. Cassidy," Sarah whispered. "I want you." Elena pulled her close, felt the small body trembling against her chest. I know, sweetheart, but Mama has to go fix something, and when I come back, everything's going to be better." Another promise she had no business making, but what else could she say? That she was riding into the mountains with documents that might mean nothing, chasing a chance that might not exist, trying to stop a man who'd already tried to kill one person and wouldn't hesitate to kill another. That if she failed, they'd lose the house anyway? That if she didn't try, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering if she could have saved them? No, she couldn't say any of that. So she held Sarah and lied about everything being better and hoped she'd survive long enough to make it true. Rowan watched from his makeshift bed on the floor. He hadn't said much since Elena announced her plan. Maybe because he knew there was nothing he could say that would change her mind. Maybe because he understood desperation better than most. After the girls finally fell asleep, curled together in Elena's bed like they used to when they were smaller, she sat down near the fire across from him. "You think I'm crazy." "I think you're brave." "Same thing, probably." Rowan shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. The bandages needed changing again. Elena could see blood seeping through the fabric. "Let me look at that." "It's fine." "You're bleeding through. That's not fine." She didn't wait for permission, just moved closer and started unwrapping the makeshift bandages with careful fingers. The wound looked better than it had, not actively trying to kill him anymore, but it was still angry and red around the edges. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts." Elena cleaned it with the last of the whiskey. Rowan's breath hissed between his teeth, but he didn't make any other sound. She worked quickly, rebandaging with strips torn from one of Thomas's old shirts. "You've done this before," Rowan said. "No, I'm just good at pretending I know what I'm doing." "Could have fooled me." "That's the idea." When she finished, she sat back. The fire was burning low. They were almost out of things to burn. Another problem she didn't have time to solve. "Tell me about Mercer," she said. Rowan was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. If I'm riding into this, I need to understand who I'm fighting." "You're not fighting him. You're just delivering documents to people who can." "Tell me anyway." Rowan sighed, ran a hand through his hair. It was starting to dry now, sticking up at odd angles. Victor Mercer showed up in the territory about 3 years ago, came in with money and connections and a smooth way of talking that made people trust him. Started buying land. Small parcels at first, nothing that raised flags. Then the railway expansion got announced, and suddenly he was everywhere. Buying more? Buying everything, or trying to. Problem was, a lot of the land he wanted wasn't for sale, so he started making it for sale. By lying about property lines. Among other things. Tax assessments that didn't match real values, loans that appeared out of nowhere, foreclosure notices on land that was paid off. He'd find whatever angle worked and exploit it, and because he had the sheriff in his pocket— Wait, Elena held up a hand. The sheriff works for him? Sheriff Hayes? Absolutely. Has for at least 2 years, maybe longer. Elena thought about Sheriff Hayes. Big man, friendly smile. The kind of person who seemed helpful right up until you needed actual help. He'd been the one to deliver her foreclosure notice, had stood on her porch looking vaguely sympathetic while he nailed that paper to her door. So when he shows up to evict me in 3 days, he'll be doing exactly what Mercer told him to do. And if I'm not here, if I'm in Silver Ridge filing a complaint, then Hayes will probably evict your daughters anyway and claim he was just following orders. The words landed like stones. Elena stared at the fire, watching flames eat through the last piece of chair leg she'd fed it 10 minutes ago. Mrs. Cassidy won't let him take them. Mrs. Cassidy has 8 kids and a husband who drinks. You think she's going to stand up to the sheriff? Then what am I supposed to do? Stay here and watch him throw us out? At least this way there's a chance. I'm not saying don't go. Rowan's voice was quiet but firm. I'm saying go with your eyes open. Mercer's not going to roll over because you show up with paperwork. He's going to fight, and he fights dirty. Elena looked at him. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I tried doing this the official way, filed preliminary reports, went through proper channels. Mercer found out and sent men to kill me. That's the reality you're walking into. So what should I do differently? Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't trust local officials. When you get to Silver Ridge, go straight to the federal courthouse. Ask for Magistrate Carver. He's the only one in the district who can't be bought. Give him the documents and don't leave until he files an emergency stay order. A stay order? It'll freeze all foreclosures in the county pending investigation. Won't fix everything, but it'll buy you time. Elena absorbed this, filed it away with all the other information she was trying to hold in her head. What about you? What about me? Mercer's men were following you. If they tracked you here, then they're either frozen to death in the mountains or they'll come looking once the weather clears. Rowan met her eyes. Which is why you need to leave before dawn, before anyone knows you're gone. The fire popped. Sparks drifted up toward the ceiling. Will you be okay here, with the girls? I can barely stand, Elena. I'm not much protection. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. I'll do what I can, but if Mercer's men show up before you get back— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Elena stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the sky was clear now. Stars scattered across black like somebody had spilled salt. The kind of night that looked peaceful right up until you stepped outside and the cold tried to kill you. I'm going anyway. I know. Even if it's stupid. It's not stupid. It's desperate. There's a difference. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold glass. My husband died 7 months ago, and I didn't cry at his funeral. Did you know that? Rowan didn't answer. Everyone expected me to. The whole town showed up waiting for me to fall apart, and I just stood there feeling nothing, like somebody had scooped out everything inside me and left the shell standing. Grief doesn't work on a schedule. I know, but I kept waiting to feel it. Kept thinking one day I'd wake up and finally be sad. Except I never was. I was just angry. Angry that he died doing work that didn't pay enough. Angry that the railroad sent me $47 like that made it fair. Angry that I was left alone with 2 kids in a dying ranch and no idea how to survive. She turned to face him. And now I find out the debt isn't even real. That someone's been lying to me. Stealing from me. Betting I'd be too scared or too stupid or too weak to fight back. You're none of those things. Mercer doesn't know that yet. Something changed in Rowan's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. No, he said quietly. I don't suppose he does. Elena went back to her packing, added the documents to her bag, wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry, added Thomas's good knife, the one he'd used for hunting, added the small pistol she'd forgotten she had until she found it in the bureau drawer, bullets rattling in a tin beside it. She'd never fired it either. Apparently tomorrow was going to be full of new experiences. Get some sleep, Rowan said. You'll want to leave before sunrise. What about you? I'll keep watch. Make sure nobody shows up uninvited. You can barely sit up. Then I'll keep watch lying down. Elena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She hadn't slept properly in days, maybe weeks. And tomorrow she'd be riding through mountain passes in winter, trying not to freeze to death. She needed rest. She lay down on the floor near the fire, using her coat as a blanket since the girls had taken all the real ones. The floor was hard and cold and uncomfortable. She closed her eyes anyway. Elena? Rowan's voice was quiet in the darkness. Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're going to make it. To Silver Ridge? To wherever you're trying to go. Elena didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed him, but it was a nice thing to hear anyway. She woke to gray pre-dawn light filtering through the window and the sound of someone moving around the house. For one disoriented moment, she thought it was Thomas, that the last 7 months had been a nightmare, and she'd wake up to find him making coffee the way he always did, humming tunelessly while he worked. Then she opened her eyes and saw Rowan trying to stand using the wall for support, his face gray with pain, and reality crashed back. What are you doing? Getting the horse ready. You shouldn't be standing. Probably not. He made it 3 more steps before his legs gave out. Elena caught him before he hit the floor, barely. He was heavier than he looked, and she was stronger than people thought, but it was still a close thing. Sit down before you rip those stitches open. The horse? I'll handle the horse. You handle not dying. She helped him back down to his makeshift bed. His breathing was labored, and there was sweat on his forehead despite the cold. The wound was bleeding again. Not badly, but enough. Stay here, she ordered. Not much choice. Elena went outside. The cold hit her like a fist. Her breath frosted immediately. The snow had stopped completely, but everything was buried. The yard, the barn, the fence posts. At least 2 feet had fallen. Maybe more in the drifts. Rowan's horse was in the barn next to Rosie. Both animals looked up when she entered, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Elena fed them from the last of the hay. Not much left. Another problem for another day. She saddled Rowan's horse, a big bay gelding who stood patiently while she worked with cold, stiff fingers. He was a good horse, calm, well-trained, the kind of animal that might actually get her through the mountains alive. If she didn't freeze first, if Mercer's men didn't find her, if the passes were even crossable after the storm. So many ifs. Elena led the horse back to the house. The girls were awake now, huddled together near the fire, watching her with identical expressions of misery. Mrs. Cassidy will be here soon, Elena told them. It was probably a lie. Mrs. Cassidy lived 3 miles away and the snow would make travel difficult, but she'd sent word yesterday and Mrs. Cassidy had promised to come. Promised. Another word that didn't mean as much as it should. Elena knelt down and pulled both girls into a hug. Margaret stayed stiff and silent. Sarah clung to her like a drowning person. I love you both. You know that, right? Don't go, Sarah whispered. I have to. Please. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, held them tighter. Be good for Mrs. Cassidy. Help with the chores. Don't open the door for anyone except her. And if Sheriff Hayes shows up, we know, Margaret said quietly. Stay inside. Don't talk to him. That's right. Elena kissed their foreheads. breathed in the smell of them, sleep and smoke and the lavender soap she'd made last summer when there was still money for such things. Then she made herself let go. Rowan was sitting up now, his back against the wall, the rifle across his lap. "Take this," he said. "You need it more than I do." "I can't shoot straight with this wound. You might actually hit something." Elena took the rifle, added it to the gear already strapped to the horse. "If anyone comes, I'll protect them," Rowan said. "Best I can." It should have been reassuring. It wasn't, but it was better than nothing. Elena swung up into the saddle. Her whole body ached from yesterday's trek through the snow. Her hands were already going numb inside her gloves. The horse shifted beneath her, uneasy. 4 days, she said. "I'll be back in 4 days." Nobody answered. Elena turned the horse toward the mountains and rode away from her daughters without looking back. Because if she looked back, she'd never leave. And if she never left, they'd lose everything anyway. The valley was silent under its blanket of snow. Nothing moved except Elena and the horse, their breath steaming, hoofbeats muffled by the drifts. She'd ridden this route before, or parts of it anyway. The main road east toward Silver Ridge, but that was in summer when the trail was clear and the weather was forgiving. Now everything looked different, landmarks buried, familiar shapes transformed into something alien. The first hour was the hardest. Not physically, though that was bad enough. The cold worked its way through her coat like it had personal business with her bones. Her hands cramped around the reins. Her face went numb except for the parts that hurt. But worse than the cold was the voice in her head listing every reason this was a mistake. "You should have stayed home. You're going to freeze before you make it 10 miles. Even if you get there, they won't care. You're nobody. Just another widow with problems. Your daughters needed you and you left them." Elena forced the thoughts away, focused on the immediate. The horse. The trail. The next 100 yards. One thing at a time. That's all survival ever was. She'd been riding for maybe 2 hours when she heard it. Hoofbeats, behind her. Not close, but not far enough either. Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. She turned in the saddle, scanning the white expanse behind her. Nothing. Just snow and trees and the trail disappearing into the distance. But the sound came again. Definitely hoofbeats. Multiple horses. Coming her direction. Elena urged her horse faster. The gelding responded immediately, breaking into a trot that sent snow spraying up around his legs. But she couldn't maintain that pace. Not in these conditions. The horse would tire too quickly, and she had 40 miles to cover. She needed to hide. There. A cluster of pine trees about 50 yards off the trail, branches heavy with snow. Dense enough to provide cover if she was careful. Elena guided the horse into the trees and dismounted. Her legs nearly buckled when she hit the ground. She grabbed the horse's reins and pressed her hand over his muzzle, praying he wouldn't make noise. The hoofbeats got louder, closer. Then 3 riders came into view on the trail she'd just left. 3 men on horseback, moving fast, scanning the ground like they were following tracks. Her tracks. Elena's breath stopped. They were too far away to make out faces, but she could see enough. Dark coats, rifles. The way they moved, purposeful, coordinated, dangerous. Mercer's men. Had to be. They'd found Rowan's trail, followed it to her house. Maybe they were there right now, questioning her daughters, threatening Rowan. No, she couldn't think about that. The riders slowed. One of them pointed at something on the ground. The trail she'd made, probably. Impossible to hide in fresh snow. They were talking. Elena was too far away to hear words, but she could see the gestures. One man pointing east, another shaking his head, pointing south instead. They were trying to figure out which way she'd gone. Elena held her breath. The horse shifted beneath her hand. She tightened her grip on his muzzle, silently begging him to stay quiet. "Please, please, please, please." One of the men dismounted, knelt in the snow examining something Elena couldn't see. He stood up, pointed directly at the pine trees where she was hiding. "No." Elena's hand dropped to the pistol at her belt. She didn't know how to shoot, didn't know if she could actually pull the trigger if it came to that. But she'd figure it out. The man took 3 steps toward the trees, then stopped. One of the other riders called out something. The man on the ground turned back. They argued. Elena could see the tension in their body language, even if she couldn't hear the words. Finally, the man on foot shook his head and remounted his horse. All 3 riders turned south. away from Elena. She stayed frozen in the trees until they disappeared from view. Stayed frozen another 10 minutes after that, waiting to see if they'd come back. They didn't. Elena finally let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. Her heart was hammering hard enough to crack ribs. That was too close. Way too close. And it meant Mercer already knew someone had taken the documents. Already had men hunting for them. Already knew this was a race. Elena pulled herself back into the saddle. She couldn't use the main trail anymore. Too exposed, too obvious, which meant taking the northern route. The dangerous one. The route most people avoided even in good weather because the pass was narrow and the drop-offs were steep, and one wrong step could send you tumbling 100 feet down into rocks that didn't care about your reasons for being there. But it was also the route Mercer's men wouldn't expect. Elena turned the horse north and headed for the mountains. The northern pass lived up to its reputation. The trail, if you could call it that, was barely wide enough for a horse. On one side, the mountain rose up in a wall of rock and ice. On the other side, nothing, just empty air and a long fall. Elena kept her eyes forward, didn't look down, focused on the horse's ears and the path ahead, and not thinking about what happened if the trail gave way. The wind was worse up here. It screamed through the pass like something alive, throwing snow and ice against her face hard enough to sting. Her hands were numb. Her feet were numb. Parts of her face she couldn't feel anymore. But she kept moving. One step. Another step. The horse was solid beneath her, sure-footed even on the ice. Elena had never been religious, but she found herself grateful anyway to whoever bred this animal, trained it, taught it to trust humans enough to carry one through hell. The pass seemed to go on forever. Hours crawled by. The sun climbed higher but provided no warmth, just flat white light that made everything look washed out and unreal. Elena's thoughts started to drift. She caught herself nodding off twice, jerked awake with her heart racing, terrified she'd fall. The cold was making her drowsy. That was bad. That was how people died up here. They got tired, closed their eyes for just a minute, and never woke up. She dug her fingernails into her palms, bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. Anything to stay alert. The horse stumbled, just once, just a tiny slip on a patch of ice, but Elena's heart stopped completely. They were at the narrowest part of the pass, maybe 3 feet of trail. The drop on the right was straight down, far enough that she couldn't see the bottom through the swirling snow. "Easy," she whispered. "Easy, boy. We're okay." The horse recovered, kept walking. Elena didn't breathe normally for another 10 minutes. When she finally cleared the pass and descended back into tree cover, she actually laughed. High and shaky and slightly unhinged, but laughter nonetheless. She'd made it. The worst was behind her, or so she thought. The arrow hit a tree 6 inches from her head. Elena reacted on instinct, threw herself sideways out of the saddle, hit the ground hard, rolled behind a fallen log. Her heart was trying to hammer its way out of her chest. An arrow. Someone had shot at her. The horse bolted, crashing away through the trees. Elena watched him disappear and felt despair open up like a pit in her stomach. All her supplies, the documents, the rifle, gone. She still had the pistol. She pulled it from her belt with shaking hands, tried to remember if there were bullets in it, tried to remember how you even fired one of these things. Her thumb found what felt like a hammer. She pulled it back. It clicked. Probably that meant it was ready. Probably. "Come out." The voice came from somewhere ahead, male, young, uncertain, not Mercer's men. Someone else. Elena didn't move. "I know you're there. I saw you fall." Silence. Then, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." "You shot at me," Elena called back. "I shot at your horse. If I wanted to hit you, I would have." That was probably supposed to be reassuring. It wasn't. Elena stayed behind the log, pistol raised, scanning the trees for movement. A figure emerged from behind a boulder about 20 yards away. Young man. Maybe 19. Skinny in a way that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with being 19. He had a bow in his hands, arrow nocked, but not drawn, and a face that looked more scared than threatening. "Who are you?" Elena demanded. My name's Danny. Danny Fletcher. I live up in the mining camps." "What do you want?" I saw riders earlier, 3 men. They looked like they were hunting someone. So? So I figured whoever they were hunting might need help. Elena didn't lower the pistol. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Danny shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Those men work for Victor Mercer. Everyone in the camps knows it, and everyone knows if Mercer wants you dead, you probably didn't deserve it. That was surprisingly astute for someone who just shot an arrow at her horse. You always help strangers by scaring their animals away? I was trying to get you to stop. Figured you wouldn't listen if I just called out. So you shot at me. Near you. There's a difference. Elena finally lowered the pistol. Not because she trusted him, she didn't, but because her hands were shaking too badly to keep it steady. My horse ran off with everything I own. He didn't go far. I can see him from here, Danny pointed. About 100 yards that direction. He's just standing there. Relief flooded through Elena so intense it made her dizzy. Why are you really helping me? Danny was quiet for a moment. The bow lowered. My pa lost our land last year. Mercer's people showed up with papers saying we owed back taxes we'd never heard of. Sheriff Hayes enforced it. We got evicted 3 days later. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be someone who fights back. He said it simply. Like it was obvious. Like that's what people did when the world tried to crush them. Maybe at 19 you still believed that was possible. I'm trying, Elena said. Then let me help. She studied him, tried to figure out if this was a trap. If Mercer had sent a kid to gain her trust, lead her into an ambush. But Danny just stood there looking cold and young and genuine in a way that was hard to fake. You know the route to Silver Ridge? Better than most. Can you get me there without running into Mercer's men? Probably. If we take the old mining roads, they're rough but they're hidden. Elena thought about it. Every instinct said don't trust strangers. Don't accept help from people you don't know. But she'd already opened her door to one bleeding stranger. Might as well make it 2. All right, she said. Help me catch my horse and we'll go together. Danny's face split into a grin. And despite everything, the cold, the fear, the impossible odds, Elena found herself smiling back. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Danny kept his word about knowing the mining roads. What he failed to mention was that calling them roads was generous. They were barely trails, narrow tracks carved into the mountainside by men desperate enough to haul equipment through terrain that actively wanted to kill them. Some sections were so overgrown Elena had to duck under branches that scraped ice across her back. Other parts were just exposed rock with a 1,000-foot drop on one side and no guardrail except hope. You said these were roads, Elena called ahead to where Danny was leading his own horse on foot. I said they were passable. That's not the same thing. Close enough. It wasn't close enough, but it was keeping them off the main trail where Mercer's men were searching, so Elena swallowed her complaints and kept moving. They'd been traveling for 3 hours when Danny suddenly stopped. What? Elena pulled up beside him. Smoke. She followed his gaze. There, barely visible against the gray sky, a thin column of smoke rising from somewhere below them in the valley. Could be a camp, Danny said. Or a house. No houses this far up, not anymore. Elena stared at the smoke. It could be nothing. Travelers, hunters, someone innocent trying to stay warm. Or it could be Mercer's men. We should check it out, she said. Danny looked at her like she'd suggested jumping off the cliff. Why would we do that? Because if it's them, we need to know where they are. And if it's not them, whoever's down there might need help. Or might turn us in for a reward. Then we'll be careful. Danny muttered something under his breath that sounded like, this is how people die, but he started leading his horse down toward the smoke anyway. The descent was treacherous. Loose rocks, hidden ice, places where the path just ended and they had to backtrack and find another way. Elena's legs were shaking by the time they got close enough to see the source of the smoke. It was a camp, small, temporary. A canvas tent half collapsed under snow and a fire that was mostly embers. And a woman sitting beside it. She looked up when they approached, hand going immediately to something in her lap. A knife, Elena realized. The woman was holding a knife, and she looked ready to use it. Easy, Danny called out. We're not here to cause trouble. The woman didn't lower the knife. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a braid, and a face that might have been pretty before exhaustion carved lines around her eyes and mouth. Then keep moving. We saw your smoke, Elena said. Wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine. She clearly wasn't fine. The camp was a disaster. No proper shelter, barely any firewood. And now that Elena was closer, she could see the woman was shivering despite sitting right next to the flames. When did you last eat? Elena asked. That's not your business. I have food, not much, but I don't need charity. The words came out hard, defensive. The kind of pride that came from losing everything except the ability to say no. Elena understood that. She dismounted slowly, hands visible, moving like she was approaching a spooked animal. I'm Elena. This is Danny. We're heading to Silver Ridge. Good for you. What's your name? The woman hesitated. The knife was still up, but her grip had loosened slightly. Claire. Claire what? Does it matter? I guess not. Elena pulled out the last piece of dried meat from her saddlebag. It wasn't much, barely a meal for one person, but it was something. She held it out. Claire stared at it like it might be poisoned. Why? Because you're hungry. You don't know me. Don't have to. For a long moment, Claire didn't move. Then her hand came up, still holding the knife in one hand, taking the meat with the other. She ate it in 3 bites, barely chewed, like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like. Thank you, she said quietly. Elena nodded, started to turn back to her horse. Wait! She turned back. Claire was standing now. The knife had disappeared somewhere into her coat. You said you're going to Silver Ridge. Why? Elena glanced at Danny. He gave a tiny shake of his head. Don't tell her. But Elena was tired of secrets, tired of being careful. And something about the way Claire stood there, alone in the snow with nothing but a dying fire and a collapsed tent, made her want to trust. I'm taking documents to the federal courthouse. Proof that Victor Mercer's been stealing land through fraud. Claire's expression changed. Mercer. It wasn't a question, it was recognition and anger. You know him? He took my house 3 months ago. Claimed my husband had unpaid debts, except my husband's been dead for 2 years and we never owed anyone anything. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. What happened? Sheriff showed up with papers. Gave me 1 day to clear out. I tried fighting it, but the bank said the debt was legal. The county clerk said the same thing. Everyone said the same thing. Claire's voice was flat, dead. So I packed what I could carry and left. Been moving around ever since. Where's your family? Don't have any. It was just me and Robert. Now it's just me. Danny had gone very quiet. Elena could feel him watching this conversation like he was waiting for it to explode. Come with us, Elena said. Both Danny and Claire spoke at the same time. What? You're going to Silver Ridge anyway. Come with us. When I file the complaint, you can add your testimony. Another person Mercer defrauded. More evidence. They're not going to care about my testimony. Maybe not, but they might care about a pattern, about proof that this isn't just one widow with a grudge, but multiple families being systematically robbed. Claire looked at the remains of her camp, at the collapsed tent and dying fire and the nothing she had left. I don't have a horse. You can ride double with me. Danny's horse can't carry 2, but mine can manage for a while. Danny finally found his voice. Elena, can I talk to you? Over here? He walked a few yards away. Elena followed. What are you doing? He hissed. Helping someone. We don't know her. She could be working for Mercer. She could be leading us into a trap. Does she look like she's working for Mercer? I don't know what that looks like. That's the point. Elena looked back at Claire, who was methodically kicking snow over her fire. She's not lying. How do you know? Because I can see it, the same way everyone saw it in me when Thomas died. That look people get when they've lost everything and they're still trying to figure out how to keep breathing. Danny ran a hand through his hair, made a frustrated sound. This is a bad idea. Probably. We're already being hunted by Mercer's men. I know. Adding another person makes us easier to spot. Also true. So why? Because nobody helped her, Elena said quietly. Nobody stood up when the sheriff came. Nobody questioned the paperwork. Nobody did anything except watch her lose her home and then forget she existed. That's not your fault. No, but I can do something about it now. Danny stared at her. then shook his head. You're going to get us all killed. Maybe. You still coming? He laughed, sharp and humorless. Yeah, I'm still coming. Apparently I'm as stupid as you are. They got Claire situated on Elena's horse. The woman weighed almost nothing, which made sense given how long she'd been living rough. The horse didn't seem to mind the extra weight. They headed back up to the mining road and kept moving east. The sun was starting to descend toward the horizon when they ran into the roadblock. Not literal, just a section where a rock slide had taken out about 20 feet of trail. Boulders the size of houses piled up in a chaotic mess that was completely impassable on horseback. Can we go around? Elena asked. Danny studied the obstacle. Maybe, but it'll add half a day to the trip, and we'd have to descend back into the valley where those riders are searching. What about over it? On foot, with the horses? Is it possible? I mean, technically, but it's going to be slow and dangerous. One wrong step and the whole thing could shift. Elena looked at the sky. They were losing daylight fast, and the temperature was already dropping. We do it on foot. Lead the horses carefully, stay spread out so we're not all on unstable ground at the same time. Claire spoke up for the first time since joining them. I've done worse, Danny sighed. Of course you have. They dismounted and started the slow, careful process of navigating the rock slide. Elena went first, testing each step before putting her weight down. The rock shifted under her boots, small movements but enough to make her heart race. One hand gripped the horse's reins, the other reached out for balance against whatever surface she could find. Behind her, Claire moved with surprising confidence, like someone who'd spent time in mountains and knew how to read unstable ground. Danny brought up the rear, muttering a steady stream of complaints that probably helped him stay calm. They were halfway across when Elena heard it, a sound like grinding stone. She froze. Don't move, Claire said sharply. Too late. The boulder Elena was standing next to shifted, just an inch, just enough. And then the whole section of rock slide started to collapse. Elena lunged forward, dragging the horse with her. Rocks tumbled past, some small, some big enough to crush a person. She felt one clip her shoulder hard enough to knock her sideways. Her foot slipped. For one terrible second, she was falling. Then hands grabbed her coat and hauled her forward onto solid ground. Claire. The woman had somehow crossed the unstable section and reached Elena before the rocks did. They collapsed together on the far side of the slide, breathing hard, while debris continued tumbling behind them. Danny? Elena's voice came out hoarse. Still here. She looked back. Danny was pressed flat against a boulder with his horse beside him, both of them waiting for the slide to stop. When it finally did, he picked his way across the remaining distance with exaggerated care. Everyone intact? He asked when he reached them. Elena did a mental inventory, bruised shoulder, scraped hands, heart trying to escape through her rib cage, but nothing broken. I'm good. Claire? Fine. Danny looked at the destruction behind them. Well, at least we don't have to worry about anyone following us that way. It was such an absurd thing to say that Elena started laughing. Then Claire joined in. Then Danny. All three of them sitting in the snow on the edge of a mountain laughing like people who'd completely lost their minds. Maybe they had, but they were still alive and still moving forward. They made camp that night in a shallow cave Danny knew about. Apparently the mining roads were full of places where workers had carved out temporary shelter during bad weather. The cave wasn't much, but it blocked the wind and gave them space to build a small fire without it being visible from a distance. Elena's shoulder throbbed where the rock had hit it. Claire had insisted on looking at it, peeled back Elena's coat and shirt to reveal a bruise already turning spectacular shades of purple. Nothing broken, Claire announced, but you're going to hurt for a few days. Add it to the list. They shared what little food they had. Danny contributed some dried fish that tasted like leather but was protein. Elena had a handful of nuts. Claire had nothing to offer but apologized anyway. Stop apologizing, Elena said. You saved my life today. You gave me food yesterday. We're even. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? Elena thought about it. About Rowan bleeding on her porch. About her opening the door. About this strange chain of people helping each other for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. I don't know, she admitted, but I think we keep doing it anyway. The fire crackled. Outside, wind howled through the mountains. Danny was working on his bow, checking the string, examining arrows. He'd been quiet since the rock slide, quieter than usual. You okay? Elena asked him, just thinking. About? About what happens when we get to Silver Ridge, assuming we don't die first. Optimistic. I'm serious. You're going to walk into a federal courthouse and accuse one of the richest men in the territory of systematic fraud. You think he's just going to accept that? I think he won't have a choice. You think the law is going to protect you? I think the law is all I have. Danny shook his head. My pa thought the same thing. Thought if he just explained the situation, showed them the records, proved we'd paid our taxes, someone would listen. Someone would help. He looked up. Nobody did. The judge sided with Mercer. The sheriff enforced it, and we lost everything anyway. The words hung in the cold air. Elena didn't have a response. Because he was right. The law had failed his family, had failed Claire's, was actively failing dozens of others across the valley. But it was still all she had. I'm sorry that happened to you, she said finally. Don't be sorry. Be ready for them to fail you too. Claire spoke up from where she was sitting against the cave wall. He's not wrong. The system is designed to protect people like Mercer, rich people, connected people, not people like us. So what am I supposed to do? Give up? No. But go in with your eyes open. Understand that you're not just fighting Mercer, you're fighting everyone who benefits from the system staying exactly the way it is. Elena thought about Rowan, about how he'd tried doing things the official way and ended up with a knife in his ribs. What if I can't win? Then at least you tried, Claire said. At least someone tried. That's more than most people can say. It wasn't exactly inspiring, but it was honest, and Elena was tired of pretty lies about how everything would work out if she just believed hard enough. She pulled the documents from her bag and looked through them again by firelight. Maps, surveys, legal records with official stamps, proof that everything Mercer had built was constructed on fraud. It had to be enough. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, she didn't know what came next. They took turns keeping watch that night. Elena took the first shift, sitting near the cave entrance with Danny's bow across her lap. He'd insisted she take it since she couldn't shoot the rifle one-handed with her injured shoulder. The mountains were quiet. Just wind and the occasional sound of snow falling from overburdened branches. Elena thought about her daughters. Wondered if Mrs. Cassidy had made it to the house. Wondered if the girls were warm, if they were scared, if they understood why she'd left. Probably not. She barely understood it herself. When her watch ended, Claire took over. The woman moved silently, settling into position near the entrance without waking Danny. Get some sleep, she told Elena. You sure you're okay? I've been sleeping rough for 3 months. This is luxury. Elena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She lay down near the fire, used her coat as a blanket, and closed her eyes. Sleep came fast. So did the dreams. She was back at the house. The girls were crying. Sheriff Hayes was nailing something to the door. Not a foreclosure notice, a coffin. Thomas's coffin. Except when it opened, it wasn't Thomas inside, it was Elena herself. And she was trying to scream, but no sound came out. She woke with her heart racing. Danny was on watch now. The sky outside the cave was just starting to lighten, pre-dawn gray. Bad dreams? He asked quietly. Something like that. Elena sat up. Her shoulders screamed in protest. She ignored it. How long until Silver Ridge? If we push hard, we could make it by late afternoon. Then let's push hard. They broke camp at first light. The morning was brutally cold but clear, no new snow at least. Small mercies. The mining road descended out of the high mountains and started following a river valley. The terrain was easier here. More trees, less exposed rock. They made better time. Around midday they passed an abandoned mining camp, a cluster of rotting buildings slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Danny barely glanced at it, but Claire stopped her horse. I know this place. You've been here before? Elena asked. My husband worked here. Before the mine closed. Before... She trailed off. Before he died? Yeah. They stood there in silence. Elena wanted to say something comforting, but everything that came to mind felt hollow. I'm sorry, she said finally. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't. Claire looked at the ruined buildings a moment longer, then turned her horse away. Let's keep moving. They were maybe 10 miles from Silver Ridge when they saw the riders. 4 of them this time. Not searching randomly anymore. Moving with purpose down the main road that intersected with the mining trail about a mile ahead. That's where we need to cross, Danny said quietly. Can we wait for them to pass? Not if we want to make Silver Ridge before dark. Elena studied the riders. They were too far away to identify, but she didn't need to see faces to know who they were working for. How long will it take them to reach the intersection? Maybe 20 minutes. And how long for us to get there and across? 10 minutes if we hurry? Then we hurry. They pushed the horses as fast as they dared on the uneven trail. Elena's shoulder jarred with every step, sending sharp pains down her arm. She gritted her teeth and ignored it. The intersection came into view, the main road cutting across their path, wide and clear and completely exposed. The riders were closer now, maybe half a mile away. We're not going to make it, Claire said. Yes, we are. Go. Now. Danny went first, urging his horse into a trot across the open ground. Then Claire. Then Elena. She was halfway across when one of the riders shouted. They'd been spotted. Ride! Elena kicked her horse into a gallop. The animal responded immediately, surging forward even with the double weight. Behind her, she heard hoofbeats, shouts. The mining trail on the far side of the road disappeared into thick forest. If they could just reach it, an arrow hit a tree 2 feet to Elena's left. Not Mercer's men. Someone else. She risked a glance back, saw 5 riders now instead of 4. All of them armed, all of them coming fast. The forest was right there. Elena's horse crashed into the trees. Branches whipped past. She ducked low over the saddle, one hand gripping the reins, the other wrapped around the saddlebag containing the documents. More shouts behind them. Closer. There! Danny pointed to a narrow game trail branching off to the left. Follow me! They veered onto the trail, barely wide enough for the horses, branches scraping at them from both sides. The riders behind them couldn't follow easily. Too narrow, too dense. It bought them distance. Danny led them deeper into the forest, following trails only he seemed to see. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses through sections too tight to ride. Elena's lungs burned. Her shoulder was on fire. But she kept moving. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Danny finally stopped. I think we lost them. They all stood there breathing hard, listening. Nothing but forest sounds. You think? Claire repeated. Not sure. This is a big forest. But yeah, I think we're clear. Elena sagged against her horse. Her hands were shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off and leaving behind exhaustion so profound she could barely stand. How far to Silver Ridge? 3 miles, maybe 4. We just have to circle around and come at it from the north. 3 miles. She could do 3 miles. She had to. Silver Ridge appeared through the trees like something out of a dream. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 200 people, a handful of buildings clustered around a central square. But it had a federal courthouse, a stone building with actual glass windows and an American flag hanging outside. Elena had never been so happy to see a flag in her life. They rode into town as the sun was setting. People stared. 3 exhausted riders on half-dead horses probably looked like trouble. Elena didn't care. She dismounted in front of the courthouse. Her legs nearly gave out when she hit the ground. You okay? Claire asked. I'm fine. It was a lie. She wasn't fine. She was exhausted and injured and terrified and running on nothing but stubbornness. But she was also here. She'd made it. The courthouse door was locked. Elena stared at it stupidly for a moment, then noticed the sign. Hours Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. It was Saturday. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She'd ridden for 2 days through mountains and snow, and people trying to kill her, and the courthouse was closed. Danny appeared beside her. There's a hotel across the square. We can get rooms. Come back Monday morning. Monday is too late. The foreclosure is Monday. Then we go first thing, soon as they open. You file the complaint and get the stay order before the sheriff can act. Elena wanted to scream, or cry, or both. But Danny was right. There was nothing else they could do. She turned away from the locked door and found herself face to face with a man she'd never seen before. He was older, maybe 50, well dressed in a way that said money without being ostentatious. and he was looking at Elena with an expression of intense curiosity. "You're looking for Magistrate Carver," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena's hand went instinctively to the documents in her bag. "Who's asking?" "Someone who might be able to help, if you're who I think you are." "And who do you think I am?" The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "A dead woman if Victor Mercer's men catch up to you before Monday morning." Elena's hand stayed on the documents. Danny had moved closer, not threatening, just protective. Claire had gone very still. "Who are you?" Elena asked. The man held up both hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Lawrence Webb. I'm a clerk at the courthouse. Have been for 12 years. The courthouse is closed. For public business? Yes. But I live above it. Saw you ride in. Saw the way you looked at that door like your life depended on what was behind it." He paused. "Does it?" Elena didn't answer. Webb studied her face, then glanced at Danny and Claire. "You came from Black Hollow, or somewhere near it. How do you know that?" "Because 5 riders came through town this morning asking about strangers heading east. Described a woman traveling alone or with companions. Said she was dangerous, possibly armed, possibly carrying stolen property." Elena felt her stomach drop. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, because I hadn't seen anyone matching that description." Webb's expression was carefully neutral. "Yet. And now you have. Now I'm having a conversation with 3 tired travelers who look like they've been through hell. What they're carrying and why is their business. It could have been a trap. Mercer could have sent this man to gain their trust, get the documents, eliminate the evidence. But something in Webb's face made Elena hesitate. A weariness that went deeper than age. The kind of tired that came from watching injustice happen over and over and being powerless to stop it. "The riders," Elena said carefully. "They're still here?" "Left around noon, headed south, but they'll be back. Men like that always come back." "Men like what?" "Men who work for Victor Mercer." The name hung in the air between them. Webb glanced around the square. A few people were out despite the cold. Shopkeeper closing up, someone leading a horse to the stable. Normal town business. But his posture had changed, alert now. "This isn't a conversation for the street. The hotel across the square. It's run by a woman named Mrs. Patterson. Tell her Lawrence sent you. She'll give you rooms and won't ask questions." "Why are you helping us?" Webb looked at her for a long moment. "Because someone needs to, and because I'm tired of pretending I don't see what's happening." He turned to go, then stopped. "Magistrate Carver will be in his office at 8 tomorrow morning. Sunday or not, he'll be expecting you." "How?" "I'll make sure of it." Then he was gone, disappearing into the growing darkness. Danny let out a breath he'd been holding. That was either very good luck or very bad luck. "No way to know which," Claire added. Elena looked at the courthouse, at the locked door and dark windows. "Let's find that hotel." Mrs. Patterson was a round woman with sharp eyes and flour on her apron. She looked them over when they walked in, took in the exhaustion, the trail dirt, the way Elena was favoring her left arm. "Lawrence sent you." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "You in trouble?" "Depends on your definition." Mrs. Patterson's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I've got 2 rooms available. One with a double bed, one with 2 singles. Cost you $4 total, including breakfast." It was more than Elena had hoped to spend, but less than she'd feared. "We'll take them. Payment up front." Elena counted out the money from her dwindling supply, watched $4 precious dollars disappear. Mrs. Patterson handed over 2 keys. "Rooms are upstairs, last 2 on the left. Breakfast is at 7. You need anything else? I'm in the kitchen." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Just don't bring whatever trouble you're carrying into my dining room." "Fair enough." The rooms were small but clean. Elena and Claire took the one with the double bed. Danny got the singles. Elena collapsed onto the mattress, actual mattress, not floor or frozen ground, and nearly wept from the relief of it. Every part of her body hurt. Her shoulder throbbed. Her legs ached. Her hands were raw from gripping reins for 2 days straight. Claire was examining the room with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to take shelter for granted. "There's a wash basin, with actual water. Is it frozen?" "No, it's inside." Claire sounded amazed. They took turns washing off 2 days of trail dirt. The water was cold, but it felt like luxury after everything they'd been through. Elena's reflection in the small mirror was shocking, hollow-eyed, pale, her hair a tangled mess. She looked like someone who'd ridden through hell, which was accurate. There was a knock on the door. Both women froze. "It's me," Danny's voice. "Just checking you're okay." Elena opened the door. Danny was standing there looking as exhausted as she felt. "We're fine. You?" "Bed's too soft. I keep thinking I'm going to fall through it." That almost made Elena laugh. "Get some sleep anyway. Tomorrow's going to be long." "Elena," Danny's expression turned serious. "What Webb said about Mercer's men coming back? What if they show up before we can file the complaint? Then we deal with it." "How?" "I don't know, but we've made it this far. We'll figure out the rest." It sounded more confident than she felt. Danny studied her face, then nodded. "Okay, I'll be next door if you need anything." After he left, Claire spoke from where she was sitting on the edge of the bed. "You don't actually have a plan, do you?" "I have documents. I have testimony. I have a magistrate who apparently knows I'm coming." "That's not a plan. That's hope." "Sometimes that's all you get." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "My husband used to say that. When the mind started having problems. When the pay got irregular. When things started falling apart. He'd say sometimes hope is all you get and you just have to make it be enough." "Did it work?" "He's dead and I'm homeless, so no, not really." Elena didn't have a response to that. She lay down on her side of the bed. The mattress was softer than anything she'd slept on in months. Her body wanted to sink into it and not move for a week, but her mind wouldn't stop. She kept thinking about Margaret and Sarah, about whether Mrs. Cassidy had made it to the house, about whether Rowan was still alive, about whether Sheriff Hayes had already shown up to evict everyone, about whether any of this would matter. "Elena?" Claire's voice in the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you for letting me come with you. You saved my life on that rock slide. I should be thanking you." "Still, you didn't have to. Most people wouldn't have." Elena thought about that. About how many people had watched Claire lose everything and done nothing. About how many people had watched her own situation deteriorate and just looked away. "Then most people are doing it wrong," she said finally. She must have fallen asleep because suddenly there was light coming through the window and someone was knocking on the door. Elena jerked awake, heart racing, reaching for the pistol she'd left on the bedside table. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, Mrs. Patterson's voice through the door. "Don't be late or you don't eat." Elena let out a shaky breath. Just breakfast. Not Mercer's men, not danger. Just breakfast. Claire was already awake, sitting by the window looking out at the street. "Been up long?" Elena asked. "Couple hours. Couldn't sleep." "See anything?" "Normal town morning, people opening shops, someone delivering mail, nothing suspicious." Elena joined her at the window. Silver Ridge looked peaceful in the early light. Hard to believe that somewhere out there, men were hunting them. They went down to breakfast. The dining room was small, just 4 tables. Danny was already there, working his way through a plate of eggs and biscuits like he hadn't eaten in days, which, Elena realized, he probably hadn't, not properly. Mrs. Patterson brought out more food, actual hot food, eggs, bacon, biscuits with butter and jam, coffee that was bitter but warm. Elena ate mechanically. She was hungry, but too nervous to enjoy it. Every sound from outside made her tense. Every time the door opened, she expected to see Mercer's men. But it was just other hotel guests, a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, normal people doing normal things. When they finished eating, Mrs. Patterson appeared with a pot of coffee to refill their cups. "You meeting with Lawrence this morning?" Elena nodded. "Thought so. He came by earlier, left a message." She pulled a folded paper from her apron. "Said to give you this." Elena unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, precise. "Magistrate Carver will see you at 8 a.m. Use the side entrance on Hill Street. Don't come to the front. L.W." "What time is it now?" Mrs. Patterson consulted a pocket watch. 7:15. 45 minutes. Elena stood up. "Thank you for breakfast and the rooms." "You're welcome. Try not to die before checkout." It might have been a joke. Elena couldn't tell. They walked to the courthouse, taking a roundabout route, Danny's suggestion. If anyone was watching the building, they'd be watching the front. The side entrance on Hill Street was partially hidden by an alley. Webb was waiting there. He looked them over quickly, then unlocked the door. Inside, quickly. They followed him through a narrow hallway into what looked like a clerk's office. Papers stacked on every surface, filing cabinets lining the walls, a desk covered in ink stains and coffee rings. Carver's office is upstairs, but first I need to see what you're carrying. Elena hesitated. I need to know it's real, Webb said, that it's enough. Because if you walk into that office with nothing but accusations, he can't help you, and Mercer will destroy you. He was right. Elena pulled out the documents, spread them on the desk. Webb spent 5 minutes examining them. His expression didn't change, but Elena saw his hands tighten on the papers. Where did you get these? A federal surveyor, Rowan Cade. He was attacked when he tried to report what he'd found. Is he alive? He was when I left. Barely. Webb carefully restacked the papers. Oh, this is enough. More than enough. This proves systematic fraud across multiple counties. Bribery of officials, forgery of federal documents. If Carver files this properly, it'll trigger a full investigation. Everything Mercer's built will collapse. If he files it properly? Magistrate Carver is a good man. Honest. But he's also careful. He won't move on this unless he's certain it's legitimate and that he can protect the witnesses. We're the witnesses. Exactly. Which means you're in danger until the investigation is official and public. Once it's filed, killing you would be pointless. Until then, Webb trailed off. Until then, we're loose ends, Claire finished. Yes. Elena looked at the documents, at the proof she'd risked everything to bring here. Let's go see Carver. They climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor. Webb knocked on a heavy wooden door. Come in. Magistrate Carver's office was larger than the clerk's room, but just as cluttered. Books everywhere. Papers stacked in precarious towers. A large desk positioned near the window. And behind the desk, a man who looked nothing like what Elena had expected. Carver was young, maybe 40, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and ink stains on his fingers. He looked more like a schoolteacher than a magistrate, but when he looked up at them, his eyes were sharp, assessing. You must be Mrs. Whitmore. How did you— Lawrence told me to expect a widow from Black Hollow carrying evidence of land fraud. Not many people fit that description. He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. Sit. Tell me everything. So Elena did. She told him about Thomas dying, about the foreclosure notice, about Rowan appearing half dead on her porch, about the documents and what they proved, about Claire losing her home, about Danny's family being evicted, about Mercer's system of fraud, and how it was destroying families across the valley. Carver listened without interrupting, took notes, asked occasional questions. When Elena finished, he held out his hand. The documents. She gave them to him. He spent 20 minutes going through them, reading every page, comparing maps, checking signatures against official records he pulled from his files. Finally, he looked up. This is extraordinary and damning. If half of what's documented here is accurate, Victor Mercer should be in prison. Should be. Will he be? Carver's expression became guarded. That depends on several factors. The investigation will take months, possibly years. Mercer has resources, lawyers, connections. He'll fight every step. But you can stop the foreclosures right now, today. I can issue an emergency stay order freezing all property seizures in the affected counties pending investigation. That will protect your home and everyone else on this list. But Mrs. Whitmore, you need to understand something. What? The moment I file this, you become the primary witness in a federal case against one of the wealthiest men in the territory. Mercer will come after you. He'll use every legal avenue available. He'll try to discredit you, intimidate you. If legal methods fail— Carver paused. You've already seen what he does when legal methods fail. Elena thought about Rowan bleeding on her floor. I know. And you're willing to proceed anyway? I rode 2 days through a blizzard with men trying to kill me to get here. Yes, I'm willing to proceed. Carver almost smiled. All right then. Give me 2 hours. I'll draft the stay order and the formal complaint. You'll need to sign it. Then I'll file it with the territorial court and send copies to the federal marshal's office. 2 hours? Legal documents require precision. If I make a mistake, Mercer's lawyers will exploit it, and the whole thing could collapse. 2 hours. It was already past 8. That meant 10 before the paperwork was ready. The foreclosure deadline was Monday morning. She'd make it, barely, if nothing went wrong in the next 26 hours. We'll wait, Elena said. Webb took them back to the clerk's office while Carver worked. There was coffee, stale and bitter but caffeinated. Danny found a corner and promptly fell asleep sitting up. Claire stared out the window. Elena couldn't sit still. She paced the small room, shoulder throbbing, mind racing. You should rest, Webb said. You look like you're about to collapse. I'll rest when it's done. Stubborn. Alive. Webb chuckled quietly. Then his expression turned serious. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you do it? Risk everything for this? Elena stopped pacing. What else was I supposed to do? Accept the foreclosure, take your daughters and leave. Start over somewhere else. Most people would have. Most people aren't me. Clearly. But I'm asking what made you different? What made you fight when everyone else just surrendered? Elena thought about it. About opening her door to Rowan. About deciding to ride to Silver Ridge. About every choice that had led to this moment. I was so angry, she said finally. After Thomas died, everyone expected me to be sad. To cry and grieve and eventually accept it. But I wasn't sad. I was furious. At the railroad for killing him. At the debt for trapping me. At every person who looked at me like I was already dead. She paused. Then I found out the debt was a lie. That someone had been stealing from me. Counting on me being too weak or too scared to fight back. And something just broke. Or maybe it was already broken and I finally noticed. What broke? The part of me that cared about being scared. About being appropriate. About being the kind of widow everyone expected me to be. Elena met his eyes. I stopped trying to survive and started trying to win. Webb was quiet for a moment. Your husband would have been proud. My husband would have been terrified. Thomas was a good man, but he didn't like conflict. Probably would have told me to take the deal and run. But you didn't. No, I didn't. At 9:30, one of Carver's assistants appeared. The magistrate needs Mrs. Whitmore upstairs. Elena followed him back to Carver's office. The magistrate looked exhausted but satisfied. Papers were spread across his desk in organized stacks. Everything's ready. I need you to read this and sign at the bottom. He handed her a document. Elena read it carefully, or tried to. The legal language was dense and confusing, but the core was clear. She was formally accusing Victor Mercer of fraud, requesting emergency intervention, agreeing to testify. She signed her name. Carver witnessed it, added his own signature and seal. Done. I'll file this within the hour. The stay order will be in effect by noon. Sheriff Hayes will receive notification by telegraph before end of business today. What about Mercer? He'll be served with a summons to appear for preliminary hearing 2 weeks from now. That gives the federal marshal time to investigate and gather additional evidence. And until then? Until then, you lay low. Don't go back to Black Hollow until after the hearing. It's not safe. Elena's stomach dropped. I have to go back. My daughters are there. Mrs. Whitmore, they're 7 and 5 years old and I've been gone for 3 days. I'm not staying away for 2 weeks. Carver removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. If you return, Mercer will know where to find you. He already knows where to find me. I'm not hiding from him. That's brave. It's also potentially fatal. Maybe. But I'm going anyway. They stared at each other. Finally, Carver sighed. At least wait until the stay order is filed. Give me until this afternoon. Then the foreclosure is officially blocked and he can't use the sheriff as an excuse to show up at your door. That was reasonable. Elena nodded. This afternoon. Then I'm leaving. She went back downstairs. Danny was awake now, looking anxious. Well? It's done. Filed. The foreclosure is blocked. Claire stood up from where she'd been sitting. So we won. Elena wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe it was over. But something in Webb's expression stopped her. What? She asked him. Nothing. It's just, Mercer's not going to take this lying down. I know. Do you? Because men like him don't lose gracefully. They burn everything down rather than admit defeat. Then let him burn. I'm not backing down now. Webb looked at her with something between admiration and concern. No, I don't suppose you are. They spent the afternoon in the courthouse. Carver filed the paperwork, sent telegrams, made it official. By 4 o'clock, it was done. Elena stood on the courthouse steps looking at Silver Ridge. Somewhere in this town were Mercer's men, probably watching, probably reporting back, probably planning their next move. She didn't care. She'd done what she came to do. Now she was going home. Danny and Claire were waiting with the horses. You're really going back tonight? Danny asked. I've been away from my daughters for 3 days. Yes, I'm going back. It's going to be dark in a few hours. Then we better hurry. Claire checked the saddle straps on Elena's horse. You know he's right. Traveling at night is dangerous, even without people hunting us. I know, but I'm going anyway. You two don't have to come. Don't be stupid, Danny said. Of course we're coming. They rode out of Silver Ridge as the sun started setting. Behind them, Elena knew Webb was watching from the courthouse window. Carver, too, probably. Both of them thinking she was making a mistake. Maybe she was. But her daughters needed her. And she'd been away long enough. The ride back was faster. They knew the route now, knew which sections to avoid. And they weren't being chased, or at least they weren't being chased yet. They made it to the mining roads by full dark. The horses picked their way carefully through the darkness. The moon was bright enough to see by, but every shadow looked threatening. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses. We're making good time, Danny said. Should hit Black Hollow by mid-morning tomorrow. Elena nodded. She was too tired to talk, too tired to think about anything except the next mile. They remounted and kept moving. Dawn found them descending out of the mountains into the valley. Black Hollow was visible in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, buildings dark against the snow. Home. Elena urged her horse faster. They were maybe 2 miles out when Claire grabbed Elena's arm. Look, she pointed. There, on the main road leading into Black Hollow, a group of riders, at least 6 of them, moving toward town in a tight formation. Mercer's men. They'd beaten Elena home. Danny swore quietly. We need to go, now! But Elena was staring at those riders, at the way they moved, purposeful, organized. They were going to her house, going after Rowan, maybe going after her daughters if they thought the girls knew something. Elena, Claire's voice was urgent, we can't fight 6 armed men. I'm not fighting them. I'm warning everyone else. She kicked her horse into a gallop straight toward Black Hollow, toward danger, toward home, because running away wasn't an option anymore. Elena's horse was half dead by the time they reached the outskirts of Black Hollow, but she didn't slow down. Behind her, Danny and Claire struggled to keep up. Ahead, those 6 riders had already disappeared into town. She cut through the back roads, taking routes she knew by heart, past the old mill, past the Cassidy place where smoke was rising from the chimney, past familiar landmarks that looked different now, smaller somehow, like she'd grown in the 3 days she'd been gone. Her house came into view, and there were horses tied outside, 4 of them. Elena's heart stopped. She pulled up short behind a cluster of trees maybe 50 yards from the house. Danny and Claire caught up seconds later. What do we do? Danny whispered. Good question. Elena scanned the scene. The front door was closed. No obvious signs of violence. But those horses meant someone was inside. Mercer's men. With her daughters. With Rowan. I'm going in, she said. That's insane. They'll kill you. Maybe. But I'm not leaving my girls in there. She dismounted. Her legs nearly gave out. 3 days of hard riding had left her barely able to walk. She ignored it. Claire grabbed her arm. Wait, look. She pointed at the barn. The door was slightly open, and through the gap, Elena could see movement. Someone was in there. Elena approached carefully, hand on the pistol she still didn't really know how to use. The barn door creaked when she pushed it open. Mrs. Cassidy turned around fast, raising a pitchfork like a weapon. Then she saw Elena and nearly collapsed. Oh, thank everything. I thought you were them. Where are my daughters? Inside the house. They're okay. I swear they're okay. Relief flooded through Elena so intense it made her dizzy. Who's in there with them? 4 men. Showed up about an hour ago. Said they were looking for the surveyor, the one who was here when I arrived. Rowan. He already left 2 days ago, managed to get on a horse and rode out before those men showed up. Smart man. Elena wanted to laugh. Rowan had survived, had gotten away. What do the men want? You. They're waiting for you to come back. Said they'd wait as long as it took. Mrs. Cassidy's face was pale. They have your girls sitting at the kitchen table. Won't let them leave. Won't let me near them. Just sitting there watching. Elena's hands clenched into fists. How many guns? All of them. Rifles, pistols. They're not even trying to hide it. Danny had come into the barn behind Elena. This is bad. We're outnumbered and outgunned. I don't care. Elena, we need a plan. The plan is I walk in there and get my daughters out. And then what? They just let you leave? Elena didn't have an answer for that. Because no, they wouldn't just let her leave. They'd been sent to stop her, to retrieve the documents, which she no longer had, to make sure she never testified, to kill her if necessary. Walking in there was suicide. She started walking toward the house anyway. Elena, wait! Claire's voice behind her. Elena didn't wait. She crossed the yard in full view of the windows. If they were watching, and they definitely were, they'd see her coming. No surprise, no advantage, just a mother walking into her own house. The front door opened before she reached it. A man stepped out. Tall, thick through the shoulders, rifle in his hands but not raised. Yet. Mrs. Whitmore, we've been waiting for you. Elena stopped about 10 feet away. Get out of my house. Can't do that. We have business to discuss. We have no business. Victor Mercer disagrees. At the mention of Mercer's name, something changed in the air. Like everyone had been pretending they didn't know what this was really about, and now the pretense was gone. I don't care what Mercer wants, Elena said. Get out of my house and away from my daughters. We'll leave. Soon as you give us what we came for. Which is the documents you stole from our employer. Elena almost laughed. I didn't steal anything. Those documents were federal property. I returned them to the proper authorities. The man's expression flickered. Surprise, then anger. You already filed them. This morning. Magistrate Carver has everything. Stay orders are in effect. The foreclosure is blocked. Your employer is being investigated for fraud. Elena took a step closer. It's over. You lost. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the man raised his rifle. Then I guess we're done being polite. Elena heard the sound of other rifles being cocked inside the house. Through the window, she could see Margaret and Sarah sitting at the table, Mrs. Cassidy standing behind them with her hands on their shoulders. Her daughters looked terrified. You shoot me. It doesn't change anything, Elena said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. The complaint is filed. The investigation is happening. Killing me just adds murder to Mercer's charges. Maybe. But you won't be around to testify. He had a point. Elena's hand moved toward the pistol at her belt. Don't. The man's rifle was pointed directly at her chest now. I will put you down right here. Is that what you want your daughters to see? No. Everything in Elena screamed no. But she couldn't back down, couldn't show weakness. These men fed on fear. What I want, she said carefully, is for you to walk away. Right now. Before this gets worse. Worse for who? For everyone. The man actually smiled. You're in no position to threaten me. I'm not threatening. I'm warning. A new voice cut through the tension. She's right. You should listen. Elena turned. Rowan was standing at the corner of the house. He looked like death, pale, moving stiffly, clearly in pain, but he was standing, and he had a rifle pointed at the man on the porch. You're supposed to be dead, the man said. Disappointing, I know. Rowan, don't, Elena started, but more people were emerging from the trees and buildings around the property. Danny, Claire, Mrs. Cassidy's husband leading 3 of his older sons, the Dalton brothers from the neighboring ranch, old widow Bennett with a shotgun that looked older than she was, more and more people, families Elena had visited on her way to gather evidence, people who'd lost land to Mercer, people who'd been too afraid to fight back. They weren't afraid anymore. The man on the porch looked around at the growing crowd, and his confidence cracked. This doesn't change anything, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Actually, it changes everything, Rowan said. See, you were counting on Elena being alone, isolated, easy to intimidate, but she's not alone anymore. So what? You think a bunch of farmers with guns makes you safe? No, but it makes you outnumbered. The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like hours. Then another sound cut through the silence. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses approaching fast. Everyone turned. 6 riders came into view, federal uniforms, marshals' badges. The lead rider was a woman, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen everything and weren't impressed by any of it. She surveyed the scene, took in the armed standoff, the children inside, the growing crowd of witnesses. Well, she said, this looks complicated. The man on Elena's porch lowered his rifle slowly. Marshal Kincaid, this is a private property dispute. Nothing that concerns federal authorities. That's interesting, because I have a complaint filed by Magistrate Carver claiming Victor Mercer orchestrated systematic land fraud across 3 counties. And here I find armed men threatening the primary witness. Kincaid's expression didn't change. Seems pretty concerning to me. We're just trying to collect a debt. With rifles pointed at a woman and her children. That how debt collection works now? The man didn't answer. Kincaid dismounted, walked past Elena without looking at her, climbed the porch steps until she was face to face with the man. I'm going to make this very simple. You and your friends are going to put down your weapons. You're going to get on your horses, and you're going to leave, right now. Or what? Or I arrest all of you for witness intimidation, unlawful detention, and whatever other charges I can think of on the ride back to the territorial prison. She paused. Your choice. The man looked past her at his companions. Some kind of silent communication happened. Then he lowered his rifle completely. This isn't over. Yeah, it is, Kincaid said. You just don't know it yet. The men filed out of the house. Margaret and Sarah ran to Elena, nearly knocking her over. She grabbed them both, holding so tight it probably hurt, but she couldn't let go. Mama, I'm here. I'm here, babies. You're safe. She watched over their heads as Mercer's men mounted their horses and rode away, watched until they disappeared from view. Only then did she let herself breathe. Marshal Kincaid approached. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm glad we got here when we did. How did you know to come? Magistrate Carver sent word yesterday that the primary witness in a major fraud case might need protection. Figured it was worth the ride. Kincaid looked at the crowd still gathered around the property. Looks like you already had protection. Elena glanced at the people who'd shown up, neighbors she barely knew, families she'd visited once, people who had their own problems but came anyway. I didn't ask them to come. Didn't have to. Word got around what you did. Writing to Silver Ridge, filing the complaint, standing up to Mercer when everyone else was too scared. Kincaid almost smiled. People remember that kind of thing. Over the next several hours, Elena gave her formal statement to Marshal Kincaid, answered questions, provided every detail she could remember about Mercer's operation. Rowan, who'd apparently been hiding in Mrs. Cassidy's barn recovering from his injuries, added his testimony. Then Claire, then Danny, then half a dozen other families who'd lost property. By evening, Kincaid had enough evidence to fill a ledger. This is going to take months to sort through, she admitted, maybe years. Mercer has lawyers, money. He'll fight every step. But you can win, Elena asked. Oh, we'll win. Evidence like this? He's done. Question is just how long it takes and how much damage he does fighting it. What about the foreclosures? Stay order covers everything. All properties in question are frozen pending investigation. Nobody gets evicted. Nobody loses their land. Elena felt something in her chest finally unclench. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're the one who did the hard part. Kincaid packed up her notes. I'll need you to testify when this goes to trial. Probably multiple times. You prepared for that? Yes. It won't be easy. Mercer's lawyers will try to tear you apart on the stand, discredit you, make you look unstable or dishonest, or let them try. Kincaid studied her face, then nodded. Yeah, I think you'll do fine. After the marshals left, Elena finally had time to just be with her daughters. They'd been staying with Mrs. Cassidy since Elena left, sleeping at the neighbor's house, eating their meals there, trying to be brave while their mother was gone. Now, they wouldn't let Elena out of their sight. Margaret kept touching her arm like she needed to confirm Elena was real. Sarah had crawled into her lap and refused to move. "I thought you weren't coming back," Sarah whispered. "I promised I would." Papa promised too. The words hit harder than they should have. Elena pulled Sarah closer. "I know, baby. I know. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. What about those bad men? They're gone. They can't hurt us anymore." Margaret looked up at her with those two old eyes. "Are we going to lose the house?" "No. We're keeping the house. All of it. It's ours. Promise?" Elena thought about all the promises she'd made over the past few days. All the things she'd said would happen without knowing if they actually would. But this one she could keep. "I promise." That night, after the girls finally fell asleep in their own beds in their own house, Elena sat at the kitchen table with Rowan. He still looked rough. The knife wound was healing, but slowly. But he was alive. Against all odds, he was alive. "You should have stayed hidden," Elena said. "Probably. But I saw those men show up and figured you could use backup. You could barely stand. Didn't need to stand. Just needed to hold a rifle." Elena shook her head, but she was smiling. "Thank you for everything. I didn't do anything except get myself stabbed and pass out on your porch. You brought me the evidence, told me about Mercer, gave me a reason to fight. You gave yourself that reason. I just provided the paperwork." They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled. Outside, the night was quiet. "What are you going to do now?" Elena asked. "Continue the survey work. Testify when they need me. Make sure Mercer actually faces consequences." "And after that?" Rowan looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "I don't know. Guess that depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain widow might want some help fixing her barn, and her fences, and about 100 other things that need doing around here." Elena felt her breath catch. That certain widow has 2 daughters who ask too many questions in a ranch that barely makes enough to feed 3 people, let alone 4. Sounds difficult. It is. Good thing I like difficult. They looked at each other across the table. The space between them felt charged with possibility. "Rowan, you don't have to answer now, or ever. I'm just saying if you need help, I'm offering." "Why?" "Because I watched you ride into a blizzard to save a stranger. Watched you cross the mountains with killers hunting you. Watched you stand up to armed men on your own porch without flinching." He paused. "That's not someone I want to walk away from." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And for now, that was enough. The trial happened 4 months later. Mercer showed up in an expensive suit with 3 lawyers. He smiled at the judge, shook hands with the prosecutor, acted like a man who'd never broken a law in his life. Elena sat in the witness box and told her story. Mercer's lawyers did exactly what Kincaid had warned. They questioned her credibility, suggested she was motivated by grief and anger rather than truth, implied she'd fabricated evidence. But the documents didn't lie. Map after map showing altered boundaries, federal surveys that didn't match county records, forged signatures, bribed officials who'd already confessed, witness after witness corroborating the same pattern of fraud. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Mercer was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized. His company dissolved. The land he'd stolen was returned to its rightful owners. Black Hollow started to heal after that. Families rebuilt. Ranches recovered. People who'd been living in fear started breathing easier. Elena's ranch did better than she'd expected. Not because of anything dramatic. She didn't suddenly become rich or successful. But the land was hers free and clear. No debt, no mortgage, no one threatening to take it. And she had help now. Rowan stayed. Not right away. He finished his survey work first, tied up the loose ends of the investigation. But he came back. Fixed the barn. Mended the fences. Taught Margaret how to repair bridles, and Sarah how to recognize different bird calls. He didn't push Elena for anything she wasn't ready to give. But slowly, over months, the house stopped feeling so empty. Claire found work in town, seamstress work that actually paid, saved up enough to rent a small house, started rebuilding the life Mercer had stolen. Danny went back to the mining camps with money Elena had insisted he take as payment for helping her. Last she'd heard, He'd bought out a failing claim and was making it profitable through sheer stubborn persistence. Sounded about right. A year after the trial, Elena stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold and orange and red. Margaret and Sarah were in the yard playing some complicated game involving chickens and a wheelbarrow. Rowan was in the barn doing evening chores. Smoke rose from the chimney behind her. Everything looked peaceful, normal, like nothing terrible had ever happened here. But Elena remembered. She remembered being so scared she could barely breathe. Remembered riding through the mountains certain she was going to die. Remembered standing in front of armed men with nothing but stubbornness keeping her upright. She'd survived all of it. Not because she was fearless. She'd been terrified every step of the way. Not because she was strong. She'd nearly collapsed a dozen times. Not because she was special or chosen or destined for anything. But because she'd opened a door when everyone else closed theirs. Because she'd chosen compassion over fear. Because when the world told her to stay down, she stood up anyway. Sometimes Elena thought about what would have happened if she'd made different choices. If she'd turned Rowan away that night. If she'd accepted the foreclosure. If she'd stayed quiet and small and safe. She'd have lost everything. Her home. Her daughter's future. Her sense of self. But more than that, dozens of other families would still be trapped under Mercer's fraud. Still losing their land. Still too scared to fight back. One choice. One door opened in a blizzard. That's all it took to change everything. Rowan came out of the barn and climbed the porch steps, stood beside her watching the sunset. "Beautiful night," he said. "Yeah. Girls want to know if they can stay up late since tomorrow's Saturday." "Absolutely not. It's already past their bedtime." Rowan smiled. "That's what I told them. They said to ask you anyway." "Tell them nice try, but no." He started to turn back inside, then paused. "Elena? You ever regret it? Everything that happened?" She thought about it, really thought about it. About the fear and the pain and the exhaustion. About riding through mountains with killers hunting her. About standing in front of guns with nothing but words for protection. About all the ways it could have gone wrong. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it." "Not even the hard parts?" "Especially not the hard parts. Those are the ones that mattered." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, then leaned over and kissed her forehead. "You're extraordinary. You know that?" "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." "Maybe, but I'll take it." He went inside to wrangle the girls into bed. Elena stayed on the porch a while longer. The valley was quiet now, peaceful, like it had always been this way. But she knew better. Peace wasn't something that just happened. It was something you fought for. Something you built, something you protected. And sometimes it started with the smallest choice, like opening a door during a storm, like helping a stranger, like refusing to give up even when giving up made more sense. Elena thought about all the people in Black Hollow who told her she wouldn't survive the winter alone, who'd looked at her like she was already dead. They'd been wrong. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd won. Not because she was the strongest or the bravest or the most capable, but because when the moment came to choose between fear and hope, she chose hope, and kept choosing it every single day. Inside the house, she heard Margaret laugh at something Rowan said, heard Sarah's answering giggle, heard the sounds of her family being okay, being safe, being home. Elena smiled. Then she went inside, closed the door behind her, and went to tuck her daughters into bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch would need work. Winter would come again. Life would continue being difficult because that's what life did. But tonight, everything was okay. And sometimes, Elena had learned, okay was enough. Sometimes it was more than enough. It was everything. Years later, people in Black Hollow would still tell the story. About the skinny widow everyone thought would collapse under the weight of her grief. About how she'd ridden through a blizzard to save a dying stranger. About how she'd crossed the mountains being hunted by killers. About how she'd stood on her porch facing armed men and refused to back down. About how one woman's refusal to surrender had saved an entire valley. The story would grow in the telling, the way stories do. Details would get exaggerated. Elena would become braver, stronger, more heroic than she'd actually been. But the core truth remained. That courage doesn't always look powerful. Sometimes it looks like a thin woman with tired eyes making impossible choices. Sometimes it looks like helping someone even when you have nothing left to give. Sometimes it looks like standing up when staying down would be easier. And sometimes when you're brave enough to open one door, you discover that other people have been waiting for permission to open theirs. That's what Elena's story really was. Not about one woman beating impossible odds, but about what happens when one person's courage gives others permission to be courageous too. When one open door becomes 10, becomes 100. When isolated people realize they were never really alone. That's how you change a valley. That's how you win. Not through strength or weapons or force, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to let fear make your choices. And if a skinny widow nobody believed in could do it, then maybe anyone could. That was the lesson Black Hollow learned. That was the truth Elena proved. That ordinary people facing impossible situations could still win. If they just refused to quit. If they just kept moving forward. If they just opened the door.